In this video, I'm going to guide you step by step to launch your first cold emailing campaign without burning your domains right from the start. So yes, cold emailing is a powerful way to generate qualified appointments, but without the right setup and without strictly following a number of best practices, you risk shooting yourself in the foot. And for that, I suggest using only 3 tools to keep things simple throughout this video. The first one will be mailpool to create the mailboxes you'll use to reach out to prospects. The second is LinkedIn to source the data. And the third is Lemlist to warm up your mailboxes, write the messages, send the campaigns, and analyze them. I am Antoine Thoreau, co-founder of the B2B lead generation agency Sendo and the online training platform B2B Ninja. I started cold outreach 10 years ago and have continued to perfect this craft within all kinds of companies, from hyper-growth scale-ups to fairly undigitized family SMEs and every type of B2B business in between. On this channel, I share my expertise, including both strategic insights and detailed operational methods. And here are the 4 main sections we'll go through together to help you quickly launch your first campaigns. My goal is really to guide you efficiently toward campaigns that already deliver your first results. Obviously, I won't be able to go into detail on every part, otherwise it would require an entire course. In fact, that's the focus of one of my courses in B2B Ninja, the prospecting machine, which really breaks down each part so you can master them. But here in this video, I'll try to provide a step-by-step approach using specific tools with no alternatives so you can follow along in the most practical and fastest way possible. So we'll be covering these 4 topics: infrastructure, strategy, list, and copywriting. Let's get started with infrastructure. In this first part, I'll show you how to organize your domains and your inboxes. I'll show you how I use mailpool and how I suggest you use it as well, to save a huge amount of time during the setup phase. I'll also explain how we'll use Lemwarm to warm up these email addresses, which is an absolutely essential step. This is a Notion document that we ask all our clients to fill out during onboarding at Sendo. And what I wanted to share with you is mainly that this is what a cold email infrastructure will look like. That means we'll need to distribute the inboxes across several domains. So within each domain, we'll create email addresses in the names of the people who are sending the messages. So for us at Sendo, it's always in the name of real people. You could also use fake names, made up names. There wouldn't be any particular issue with that. But in terms of effectiveness, for certain reasons, we prefer to use the identities of real people, like salespeople or founders within the companies. Now, the number of inboxes we create depends on our goals in terms of volume. So for us, when we take on a client, depending on the package they've subscribed to, we won't set up the same number of inboxes for them. By the way, there's also a tool that I'm sharing in the comments, which I'm also giving you for free under this video. It's called Labac. Labac allows you to size your stack. So in terms of inboxes, in terms of how many LinkedIn accounts you would need if you're doing multi-channel, which isn't today's topic, and how many enrichment credits you need, etc. In short, if you've completed this step and you more or less know how many inboxes you need to set up, you'll have to distribute them across domains, web domains that will resemble your main domain without actually being your main domain. This is generally a good practice to stay safe. Don't use your main domain for cold emailing because there's always a risk when doing cold email that this domain could end up on blacklists. The best practice to keep in mind is to create between 3 and 5 email addresses per domain. And I'm specifically talking about the new domains that we create, which will therefore be recent and have very little history. So you see, in practice, this is what the setup might look like for one of our clients. For now, we only have 6 inboxes on Google Workspace. We have the identities of 2 people, Stefan and Gabriel, and we've created inboxes dedicated to cold emailing, which are spread across 3 domains. To purchase the domains, you can simply find them through standard providers, just as you would if you needed a domain to create a new website. You can check which ones are available by trying to choose a domain that closely resembles your main domain. You need to be a bit creative. Sometimes you have to add a hyphen or something extra, but that's not very important. Don't focus too much on that and don't waste too much time on it. However, I strongly recommend choosing .com domains or geographic extensions like .eu if you're in Europe or .fr if you're in France. Once you're prospecting in France, your geographic targeting needs to be consistent. However, don't choose, as we see here, somewhat unusual extensions. That will hurt you in terms of deliverability and trust. Once you have a domain, you'll be able to create inboxes as if you needed inboxes for colleagues in a typical work setting, either with Google Workspace or with Microsoft. The downside of doing it yourself is that you'll end up paying more than with the solution I'm about to show you. You'll have to set things up for a certain number of inboxes, so even if you have 10, doing the work 10 times is really a waste of time. And on top of that, you'll have to handle technical configurations yourself to prove your legitimacy to the email service provider. So you'll have to set up things like DKIM, SPF, and brand authentication yourself. If this doesn't mean anything to you, or if it scares you, I actually have a solution for you that will spare you the pain of having to do technical configurations and dealing with this jargon if you're not familiar with it. That solution is Mailpool. The promise of Mailpool, as you can see, is to let you set up your email infrastructure in just a few seconds, or at least in a few minutes. It's also a French solution. I'm also putting an affiliate link in the description if you want to use it. I've tested a lot of them. There are a lot of competitors, and I find this solution excellent. I think the user experience is great. It really is very fast, and it's secure in terms of the subtleties behind deliverability. I don't have time to go into detail in this video. And by the way, I've made a special video about deliverability that you can check out. But basically, you can trust this solution to get quality inboxes. And above all, as we'll see, it's incredibly fast, actually. That's even more interesting for us as an agency. But even if you only have one team to set up, well, you still have every reason to use this solution because, as we'll see, it's also cheaper. Actually, you see, I can manage all my inboxes here. And if I need to add inboxes, I just add as many as I want here. And as you can see, we can use the Mailpool inboxes with an SMTP configured by the service, which costs $3 per month, Google at $4, which is cheaper than if you bought it yourself, and Microsoft at $5, which is also cheaper. So in my example here, I'm going to go ahead and set up 2 Microsoft mailboxes, specifically Office 365 Outlook accounts, because I actually have a very specific and practical need for them right now. Right now, it's about adding 2 inboxes for the client I mentioned earlier to have a mix. In fact, we would have 6 Google addresses and we're going to have 2 Microsoft ones. There you go. I can simply add the desired number. On Mailpool, everything is centralized. I don't need to go anywhere else. I can both create new domains and create new inboxes on them. So here I'm going to create a new domain that will be linked to Microsoft inboxes for my client. I just need to go here and create new domains. Actually, what I can do is give it the real domain and ask it to generate, using AI, a certain number of domain recommendations. I don't have to use this feature, but sometimes it can give me some ideas, whether I use them or not. Otherwise, I just add the domain I want and buy it directly on the platform. So here, I've tested 2. The system tells me that one is not available and the other is, and that I can buy it for $15. So I'll keep only the one that's available for $15. And so here I have the option to redirect to my main domain. That way, it's perfect. Everything will be set up right away by the system. Finally, it's important to add a demarcation email address. Actually, it's the email address that will receive all the demarcation notifications. It doesn't matter. There's no need to go into detail. You just need to put one in. So either you use a real existing email address, or you can also put an address here that you'll create right after. But, well, there's always a small risk that if something doesn't work, you'll have to go back and change the settings. So I recommend that you use a real address, and that's what I'm going to do right now. Don't stress about it. Actually, it's just an address that will receive automatic notifications. It just needs to exist. The choice of this address isn't very important unless you have an IT department that asks you to provide a specific address to receive them. And in that case, you can check with them, and that's even better. There you go. So I've entered all the information. I click Next. And now I just need to fill in some administrative information. Then there's a quick checkout, and that's it. It's as simple as that. The domain has been purchased. It's pending. Very soon it should become active. In the meantime, let's look at creating an inbox. What I want to do is create 2 Outlook inboxes. So I go here, and actually it's simple. I just enter the person's name and the email I want to create. For the email prefix, I can put whatever I want. There are no rules. Other than that, I just recommend using something standard so that your contacts don't get confused or react with surprise. So here, you see, if I go back and look at all my domains, actually we have the new domain that just switched to active. It really took less than a minute, which means that, as we can see, it currently has 0 inboxes attached to it. So now on the inbox creation page, I can actually select it to create my inboxes. So I can also have a master inbox where I forward all the emails. But that's not how we're organized, so I don't use it, and I can directly set up the signature I want to configure. Regarding the signature, you can check out my video on deliverability. Keep it simple, 3 lines max. That's my recommendation. No HTML or very little. So here I have a first one. You can see how much the user interface is going to save me time. Now I'm going to create a second one just by clicking on Add New Inbox. I'm going to create one for Gabriel. There you go. That was very quick. And if I have 10 to do like this, well, I just add as many inboxes as I want. So I can do them all at once in a batch like this. I can also add profile pictures if I want to, Once I've set this up the way I want, after a quick check, I click on Create Inbox. And now it asks me to upgrade my plan and to add, well, 2 inboxes to my usual bill. Creating inboxes is generally a little slower than creating domains, but we're still only talking about a few minutes. And once they're active, you'll find them here among all your inboxes. With the edit option on the right, you can see all the details, and in particular, you can view the credentials. So actually, when you need to log in, whether it's to the inbox in the usual way, just like your regular email, or if you need to connect it to a tool, which we'll do in a moment with Lemlist, you come here and you can display the password and copy paste the authentication code. And so that's also super convenient because you don't need to set up two-factor authentication for security. Sometimes you're required to do it and so on, or to enter your phone number, which you might discover if you start having a lot of inboxes. After a while, Google or Microsoft, if you keep entering the same phone number for SMS verifications, they'll end up blocking you. So here, it's as if you had set up two-factor authentication with an Authenticator app, and you have this code you can copy, knowing that one of the inboxes will be the admin. They don't all have this admin tab, but there will be one that does because it's linked to a Google Workspace or the Microsoft equivalent. Now that you've created your domains and your inboxes on the fly, just like I showed you, we're going to connect them to Lemlist. We're going to go to Lemlist. This is the tool I recommend for managing all your cold outreach campaigns. I've done a full presentation of the tool in another video that you can check out. I'm not going to explain the platform to you in detail again. If you want to discover this platform and get familiar with it, I'll refer you to that other video. In the meantime, we're going to go back to the example of the client I showed you. So if you need to add or connect the first inboxes, which are also called senders, you go to your profile in Lemlist. So down here on the bottom left, you click on your name, go to settings, and under sending parameters, you'll be able to add your email addresses. So basically, just by clicking here, you accept and you choose the right solution. So here we've set up Microsoft inboxes, and then this pop-up opens. And then you just need to log in as usual, as if you had an account. So this is where, if needed, you go back to the mailpool interface, copy and paste the password, copy and paste the authentication code, and follow the process. Once you've done that, you'll have a certain number of inboxes. So if I show you our client's example again, today we have a total of 6 email addresses, and we're adding 2 more, which will be 2 Microsoft addresses. From there, it means you'll be able to automate sending emails from Lemlist, and you'll also be able to read the replies sent to those addresses. Now, a very important warning. When you connect the inboxes for the first time for cold emailing, there's something that, in my opinion, isn't done very well on Lemlist. The daily limits are set to 50 by default, which is way too high. Even at cruising speed, that's too much. But on top of that, at this stage, you haven't even done any warm-up yet. So you absolutely must not use the inboxes or start blasting campaigns at this point. Otherwise, you'll, as we say, burn these inboxes and the domain could end up being blacklisted potentially permanently. So actually, when you get to this point, you can go to the interface where I am now, which is the sending settings, but at the team-wide level. And my advice is to set everything to 0. And right after that, you start the warm-up. The warm-up can be done on Lemlist using Lemwarm with the built-in feature. So you go to Lemwarm, you go to the warm-up tab, and you activate Lemwarm for all your new inboxes by setting the final target here, the increment, meaning how much it increases each day during the ramp-up phase. And then you launch it. Don't forget to click on Start and check that it's running. You can set a final target of between 20 and 30 emails per day at the time I'm making this video. And I recommend that you regularly check for best practices because these things can change and have changed a lot in recent years. I also recommend that you actually have exactly the same number of emails as your final target on Lemwarm as the number of emails you actually send. So if you have 25, you'll send 25 in your real sequences to your actual prospects. And above all, make sure to keep Lemwarm activated at all times, even after the warm-up phase. This is what a warm-up phase looks like. You can see that we started on August 31st. A few weeks later, we reached the threshold of 25, which is our cruising speed, knowing that we could have gone a bit more slowly if we weren't in a hurry, by increasing by just 1 at a time. You need to be patient, not skip any steps, and make sure your score is at least above 80 before launching campaigns. And I even recommend that you go above 90. Above 90, we're really talking about very good scores. Be aware that nowadays it's recommended to do between 3 and 4 weeks of warm-up with a dedicated software like this. If you launch your campaigns earlier, you're putting your domains at risk. And that's a shame because you might then have to start all over again, buy new domains, and create new inboxes. So you'll end up losing more time than you think you might save by speeding up the process. So wait at least 3 weeks, do things properly, follow the recommendations, and in the meantime, you'll be able to prepare your campaigns with the steps we'll look at right after this. Now that our cold email infrastructure is in place and the warm-up has started, and so since this gives us a non-negotiable period during which we can't launch campaigns yet, it gives us the opportunity to prepare everything we need, so that afterwards, as soon as the warm-up is over, we're ready to launch as early as possible. So now we're going to talk about strategy. And to help frame this strategy, I'm going to exceptionally share with you for free 2 documents. And I say exceptionally because these are documents that are usually sold. Normally they are paid, but for you who are watching this YouTube video, so that you can fully and freely apply my recommendations here. Right now, you have a link to download them for free. The first tool I recommend you use is one that we use with all our clients at the agency. We ask them to fill it out and then we refine it together. We've named it. We've called it the Shuriken. So what's the idea? It's that you're going to define your targets, especially for us. We mainly talk about ICP, ideal customer profile. It's kind of the non-personalized equivalent of personas. We're going to describe all the criteria that define your ideal target. We have a first tab, you see, where there are nearly 80 fairly standard job titles in B2B. And based on that, for example, if I select financial directors, it changes the information in there for you. It gives you the TAM, the total addressable market. So actually, it's the total number of profiles without any other criteria that we can find in France. On LinkedIn, if we search for financial directors, obviously, these searches are carried out very precisely using our Boolean prompt library, where we use quotation marks and Boolean operators like OR and AND to be both surgically precise and at the same time capture all the job titles that match. And not to forget certain titles, since there are always plenty of different ways to refer to a given position. So you see, if your target is in this drop-down list, you can use it. First, it gives you an estimate of the number, and above all, it gives you Boolean strings that you can copy and paste into LinkedIn to conduct a super precise search. You also have exclusion Booleans. For certain positions, we exclude things specific to that role. And generally speaking, we exclude everything like students, teachers, professors, interns, etc. This way, you really get decision makers and avoid off-target profiles. So that's on the first tab. It lets you play around a bit with the tool, and then the exercise in terms of strategy is to really define your different segments, your different ICPs. You can have ICPs that are somewhat related, where you just change 1 or 2 filters in the search. And you can also have completely different segments. But be careful not to spread yourself too thin. So it's in your best interest to do it this way, different segments. What we'll do next is later on run campaigns for each of these ICPs. So you see, you have the same drop-down list. Then you can, of course, select a location, you'll select the company size and so on. So if I give you an example, if I'm reaching out to CEOs of companies with 10 to 50 people, these are more like entrepreneurs who are still quite hands-on. At this stage, they're obviously starting to manage and delegate a lot, but they're still close to the field and so on. Now, if I take CEOs from CIC 40 companies or international group structures, obviously they can't be approached in the same way. So in fact, we could test the same job title for a criterion like this, which varies. So without going to these two extremes, we could say, I'll actually look at my campaigns to see if I notice any differences or if I have hooks that work better than others. Also, depending on the type of company, the size of the company, we can also include a certain number of sectors and other criteria. And actually, the more precise you are, the better. On the right, you'll find the same system where you can copy and paste the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So there you go. I strongly encourage you to do this exercise and to create this document internally with your colleagues, and that it be shared with the whole team to very clearly define the ICPs you need to target, and if necessary, the different segments or subsegments you are going to test. The other document I recommend you use to define your strategy and generate ideas is the one we call the Scrolls, which you can also download for free in the description. It's a library of templates for copywriting. There are about 40 of them, roughly 40 templates. Templates like these with suggested variables and things to adapt. So we have a whole first category of hooks. So you see, you can explore this document in Notion. You have drop-down options like this. And actually, that's why I'm mentioning it to you right from the strategy section and not yet in the copywriting part, since it allows you to brainstorm a bit about the different strategies you can follow. In fact, you have direct approaches and indirect approaches. That is to say, with direct approaches, these are methods where we're still quite commercial, quite straightforward. We're not going to pitch, but we'll try to spark interest to directly set up a meeting. And the call to action is going to be the meeting. And so afterwards, you see that it works in a branching structure. You have the option to personalize by contact, either because you're going to do very personalized things by hand on small batches, more in an account-based marketing approach, or because you'll use either manually or with AI to generate icebreakers. If you don't have this option or you don't want to do it, you'll personalize by batch, with or without signals. I'm not going to go into detail because we wouldn't have enough time in this video. But basically, if you don't have any signals and you haven't sourced your data from a specific base, I would rather recommend that you go here. Actually, with signal-free scraping, LinkedIn, that is, you'll find your data on LinkedIn in a fairly classic way for B2B. And here you have classic hooks. These hooks you see are based on pain points. Okay, I saw that you hold such and such a position in the company, so you might be facing one of these issues. You can use bullet points. Often that helps structure things better and makes the email a bit more noticeable. As for me, I work in this field. We basically help people like you to do this and that. For example, we've managed to achieve certain successes, trying to include as many metrics and as much proof as possible. And you can also include references. Here you can do a bit of name dropping. So you see, with copywriting, that still remains fairly concise. Well, you can send out a ton of messages, right? You can show that, you have your finger on a problem that your contact probably has, that you work with people in their industry. And you can mention your references and talk about quantified and factual results. That's kind of the classic copywriting approach. You have these sector-specific references if you're running campaigns by sector, compartmentalizing with the tool we just talked about. So once you've clearly defined your ICPs with the targeting dashboard and you have them in mind, the hook you're going to use at the moment of your copywriting, we're going to move on to the phase of creating the contact list. To create your contact list, you can either use the people database directly in the same list, and the advantage is that it's integrated into the tool and it's fast. Now, if you want to have an even larger volume of data, and especially if you want the most up-to-date, freshest data, I recommend doing this directly on Sales Navigator and using the advanced search feature of this LinkedIn premium option. Of course, it comes at a cost, but it's the optimal solution to create the highest quality lists possible. Similarly, the goal here is not to go into detail about exactly how I conduct this type of search because there's a lot to cover in terms of methodology, being rigorous with the use of Boolean operators and so on. But you can see that it's possible to do things properly and build them like this. Lists, which I call batches, that are both high quality and large enough in terms of volume too. So that in terms of quantity, you get good results for the effort of creating just one campaign. So what I generally recommend is to create batches of between 200 and 300 people. That's kind of the sweet spot. It's a sweet spot because on the one hand, you still have an interesting volume, several hundred people, but when you reach 200 or 300 people, it generally means you've done things well enough. You've narrowed down your targeting and used specific filters that will allow you to personalize the email you send afterwards. Once you've activated the Lamelyst plugin on Chrome, you can push them all at once and enrich them in the process, if you wish, into the campaign of your choice. And that's how you'll send data into Lamelyst. Here's how we organize things internally. We have documents that we call campaign managers, which allow us to log each new campaign and actually describe the strategies we use, the main criteria, etc. And this gives us, with a formula, a naming convention, a nomenclature, in fact, that will name the campaign. This allows us to easily find our way around because at some point, when you have several dozen campaigns, obviously it can get complicated. Let's say I have a campaign, the first one, that produced good results on the job title you see here, which is something quite specific to the client's industry. So here it is. Obviously, it's gibberish to us since we didn't know it at first, but it's something specific. And precisely because it's specific and well targeted, that's why we're getting good results. I'm going to create, in quotes, a sister campaign. I'm going to change just one criterion for this. That is, I'm going to expand. Instead of just putting Europe, I'm going to broaden my search to other geographies. And I'm going to include the United States. And so since I copy and paste each of my URLs, the ones from the browsers, I can take this one and paste it into my browser. And here I actually return to the search that I had prepared earlier, so I just need to paste the URL. Boom. I arrive, and all these filters are already set up without having to redo them manually, which obviously is a huge time saver. So what I'm going to do is include the United States, and actually I'll do North America, so I'll add Canada as well. but I know there aren't many profiles in Canada. It doesn't make much difference, and I'll remove Europe, and now I'll end up with, there you go, for example, with 243 results. So in this case, it's exactly in the sweet spot between 200 and 300 that I mentioned to you. So that's great. Very good. So in my organization, what I do is paste the URL here. I have a little formula that checks to make sure I haven't pasted it by mistake. A page number 2, 3, etc. Anything except page 1. Why? Because actually, if I do that and then scrape the search starting from page X, well, I miss all the results that are on the pages before page X. So that would be a bit of a shame. That's just a check. By the way, I also provide the template for this dashboard in the video description. If you're interested, you can go and get it. Actually, I have formulas that automatically give me a naming convention. So in fact, it gives me the name of the campaign I'm going to create. What I do is simply copy and paste it. So I'm going to duplicate the campaign. Let's call it a cousin campaign, since I'm basically going to use pretty much the same things. Copywriting, since we're following the same logic and targeting the same audience. So here in aim list, I'm going to duplicate it. This is just to show you how things work. But obviously, if we're starting from scratch, we create a new campaign from the ground up. To stay consistent with today's demonstration, I'm going to remove all these steps because we're only dealing with email. I'm going to keep my steps, email. That being said, when you create a new campaign, what I suggest you do is use templates, either mine, which I mentioned in the strategy section, or those you can find directly in AimList. That's also a good source of inspiration. And you can see that, in fact, when it comes to campaign templates, you can apply filters. For example, here we're talking about pure cold email. We're not mixing this with other channels. So you can choose email only and you can choose French. And here, these are users who have submitted their own campaigns. Afterwards, you can see the results. So obviously, it's in your best interest to choose campaigns with good rates, especially response rates. That's really what's important. And then you also need to choose campaigns that have a certain number of contacts, because if you have a good response rate for 30 contacts reached, it's kind of cheating. But if you have several hundred and you still have an excellent response rate, then that's truly a good campaign. Now, be careful. Most of the strategies you'll find here, the templates you'll find here, are based on specific strategies. For example, promoting an ethical product. Okay, very good. We're dealing with a somewhat particular case here. Since we're in a niche, it might not necessarily be relevant to you. Nevertheless, there's still very good sources of inspiration. And the other way, which we've already talked about, to avoid starting from a blank page and to use proven templates, is to use my document on copywriting templates. And then there you go, you can just copy and paste the examples and adapt them to your own situation. So I've created this new campaign called set_, something following my naming convention. And actually, quite simply, the fact that this campaign now exists means that on Sales Navigator, I'll be able to push all the contacts into this new campaign. I select number 7 and then I send them. So when you collect the leads within your campaign, you can find them in lead list. All the data you've been able to scrape with what we've just seen from LinkedIn. Once you're here, generally what you'll want to do is enrich this entire batch first to find the emails. And by doing this, it will start the enrichment process of the aim list, which in turn uses other providers for professional email data and email verification. So this will allow you to enrich a good portion already and to be able to send emails. The other aspect you might want to control or improve here is the overall quality of the data and the data points that will allow you to create personalization and use them as variables in your copywriting. For example, company name, it's a bit of a classic. You might want to write sentences like, I saw that you are working on such and such topic within company name. But for that, the company name needs to be something you can insert naturally into a sentence. Here, you can imagine that, for example, when you have LTD at the end, PVT Ltd, when you have INC or SAS, SSU, SRL in France, etc. We have group, Rona group, etc. It doesn't sound very natural. And so as we see here, we can use actions, AI, for improving this kind of data, or even to completely invent new data. For example, creating icebreakers, so totally personalized sentences thanks to AI based on the data we previously collected. Now, that's not really the focus of this video either, because otherwise, if we go into detail, I could do an entire course on that. But in summary, just know that if you click here and use AI, you'll be able to use templates, like, for example, the clean company name template directly. You will create a new variable name, and then you'll have an interface with a prompt that's already written, which is the template, and it will allow you to generate content using AI with your own credits or with the credits, lemless credits that you can top up at any time. For example, here, you'll be able to create a variable where you'll have the company name, which is properly cleaned up. So here, for example, you see QCD Technoventures PVT Ltd. It has properly removed the last unnecessary words. There are other rules that will follow, as you can see in this rather long prompt. I'm not going to generate this column, but you get the idea, and you can do this with a lot of things. Once you've generated this type of variable in the emails, you can add them with personalization, and you can find everything you've created. With the preview tab, you'll get this preview either in desktop format or mobile format, so you can see what it looks like with the variables that may be added, which are in blue and green. Don't worry about that. It's syntax, which is also another good practice, but we won't be covering that in this video either. So why does this campaign in this case work well? Despite the fact that it uses very classic copywriting, because as we saw earlier, we targeted for this client a persona that is really specific to their industry, who is therefore naturally interested in the product and service being sold. And overall, our approach is actually quite traditional. And you see here in this example, we're asking if the person actually works on ADAS or IMS topics. In fact, we already know the answer is yes, and this allows us to show that we've done our homework on the person and that we want to confirm this before starting the conversation. Further on, here there's a brief pitch of the solution in just one sentence, just to set the scene. And after that, we don't go into a full pitch or a detailed rundown of the features. Instead, we say, look, actually, there are already companies like Stellantis, Forvia, Lutac. So in the automotive field, these are big names. They're excellent references. So obviously we use them. And right from the very first email, in this case, to establish a bit of credibility. And we say that we're already working with major names in the industry and they're using it. Why? For reasons 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, to bring all these benefits, we're not talking about features, we're talking about the benefits that these other clients in our target sector have found. And so naturally it sparks interest and makes them think, oh yeah, they're doing that with this solution. That could be interesting for me to look into. And here, once again, we're using what's called a classic and direct approach, or a fairly straightforward one. We're going to immediately offer the prospect a 30-minute demo, and it works. Here, we're going to look at the metrics, and I encourage you afterwards, of course, to use these metric features provided by AimList. Well, you see, we have more than a 4% response rate. We have more than 2% of interest. On LinkedIn, we also have noticeably more responses. And so out of a sample of 400 leads, so far we've gotten 6 plus 5, that's 11 interested positive leads. Don't take the booked ones into account because actually very few leads go through MCAL. So in fact, that doesn't mean anything. There are roughly the vast majority of interested leads you see here who end up scheduling a meeting. Just to show you a bit of the results. In fact, only 121 people out of the 404 have fully completed the sequence. So they're currently finishing up the follow-ups. As a result, the metrics for now show that only about a third of the contacts have finished. So the metrics will inevitably continue to rise. So you see that with fairly simple copywriting, a straightforward way of sourcing contacts, no particular buying intent signals, just a good match between your target and what you're telling them, you can already get very good results. So I encourage you to then use, as I mentioned, the analytics features in Lemlist. And of course, I encourage you to regularly check the inbox because that's where you'll see everything centralized. All the responses that come in, whether positive or negative, and you'll be able to tag them in different ways and collaborate with your team. So be vigilant, be responsive. To convert as well afterwards, of course, you need to be able to schedule meetings or respond to prospects' questions right away. You shouldn't do it when it's hot, otherwise you'll miss out on opportunities. And there you go, you now have a complete setup to send your emails efficiently. So don't forget, it's an iterative process. The further you go, the more you'll improve your copywriting and all your campaigns. I recommend that you organize yourself properly to learn quickly and be able to regularly make improvements, even if they're just incremental ones. To make sure you don't miss any best practices in your setup and deployment, you can download the checklist available in the comments. And you can also download the copywriting templates, which should save you a lot of time when you're starting out and help you avoid that blank page syndrome too. To wrap up, if you like this guide, leave a like. Subscribe so you don't miss the next videos on cold outreach and growth marketing. Thank you. See you soon.